Yes, thank you, Bill. So Joseph Pearce, he's a prolific author, a playwright, an international lecturer, among other significant vocations, through which he nurtures the good, the true, and the beautiful through culture reviving arts. His books include biographies, histories, poetry, and literary overviews and analysis. His autobiography, Race with the Devil, covers his remarkable journey from racialized revolutionary nationalism to redemption through Christ. And without further ado, here is Joseph Pearce.
Well, thank you very much, Jeremy, and thank you, Bill. And I would like to say how happy I am to be with you. I love the Solidarity Party. I love what you're doing. It's much needed in our culture, and I hope that will be evident from my talk, which I'm going to be giving now. We're going on for about maybe 45 minutes, and then we'll have time for Q&A. So be thinking of good questions, because my understanding is there will be a Q&A session afterwards. So I'm happy to field any questions that you decide to put to me. The one thing that Jeremy didn't mention in the introduction was that one of my books is called Small is Still Beautiful, Economics as if Families Mattered. So I have actually written a book on the topic of subsidiarity, solidarity, localism, distributism, whatever label we want to put on what we all stand for here, I hope. So it's basically drawing from that experience. My own conversion to Catholicism was largely driven by my, initially at least, by my desire to look for an alternative to both globalist capitalism and socialism. And the ideas of initially G.K. Chesterton and Hilaire Belloc led me in that direction. And of course, I realized subsequently they were themselves getting their ideas from papal encyclicals such as Rerum Novarum and later Quadragesimo Anno, and in later biography, encyclicals such as Centesimus Annus by St. John Paul II. So my own interest in what we're talking about tonight goes right back to my youth, and it helped to lead me away from the anger and hatred of my youthful years into something more positive and more helpful, which we'll be talking about today. So amongst those influences was a book called Small is Beautiful by E.F. Schumacher, a German economist who came to live in England. He was a convert to Catholicism eventually, but to localism, solidarity and subsidiarity, largely through reading the papal encyclicals I've just mentioned. So that's where we are now. So obviously we are in a bit of a mess globally, nationally, locally, for the most part. So I want to start there. I'm going to, the first part of the talk and the second part of the talk, I'm going to start by posing or positing the question, what's wrong with the world? So that was the title of a book by G.K. Chesterton, What's Wrong with the World? And I'm going to begin by looking at it on a macroscopic level, on a global level, if you like. What's wrong with the world as the world globally? And then I'm going to, the second half would be what's wrong with the world in the sense of what can we do about it locally? So that's going to be the approach. Certainly, the issue of solidarity and subsidiarity is one of the most important issues facing humanity today. So in the past, say 100 years ago, about 100 years ago, most people believed you had to choose between capitalism and socialism, or capitalism and communism. You had to choose by a world that's run by big business or a world that's run by big government. You had to have one or the other. But what we discovered, of course, in that century since then, is that big business and big government work very happily together, along with big tech, and they are basically carving up the world to suit themselves. The bigger the government gets, the bigger the business is happy to work with, and that less interest is in the small fry in terms of ordinary people, ordinary families, small businesses, local communities, etc. So we have this sense of government and business getting further and further away from the people because of what I sometimes call the theory of progressive centralization. The idea that basically that those with power want more of it, and they're in a position because they have it to continue getting more. And so we end up where we are today with this sort of embryonic globalist scenario facing us. So let's look, for instance, obviously we have in the United States, if you look at the history of the United States politically, the power has drifted away from the family and from local government and states' rights towards a burgeoning, growing, ridiculously indebted, up to its eyes in debt, federal government, which takes more and more power to itself progressively. And in terms of big business, that the big national corporations have become global corporations. In addition, we have international financial institutions such as the International Monetary Fund, the World Bank, and then political superstructures such as the United Nations or the European Union, all of which are fundamentally undemocratic and unresponsive to the needs of ordinary people. Indeed, do they care about ordinary people? So the situation is the big government and big business are bedfellows. It's not a question of choosing between the two. They're on the same side. So we have to choose something that is an authentic bona fide solution to that problem, an alternative to that problem. We need a radical rethink. And I want to talk a little bit about democracy here, because if democracy is going to mean anything at all, it means ordinary people having real power over their political and social destinies. In other words, having a real say. And of course, the bigger government gets, the further it is away from the ordinary individual person and family, the less responsive it is, and the more alienated we are from it, the more alienated it is from us. So obviously, if things ever got to the situation where something like the United Nations became an embryonic world government, our votes would be absolutely meaningless in any meaningful sense of the word. So in other words, that democracy only works on a human scale, which means it only works on a local scale. And if we're going to have genuine, authentic democracy, we have to have a democracy of small areas. In other words, the revitalization of local government and revitalization of the rights and responsibilities of ordinary families, and a devolving of power away, first of all, from global structures, but also national structures. I want to say something maybe about walls. It's a quite seems to be quite fashionable these days to say that walls are a bad thing, and that we erect walls somehow we are not being good Christians. Let's get one or two things straight here. People have said that, for instance, in the higher echelons of the hierarchy of the Catholic Church, that they seem to forget that there's a wall all the way around the Vatican, for good reasons. It was originally erected to keep the Saracens out, but certainly still now needs to keep terrorists out or unwanted people out or what have you. And the only way you can get in is through St. Peter's Square, where you're going to meet Swiss guards and security people and basically all sorts of border control. So no one is suggesting that there's anything wrong with walls in that level. So if it's true of smaller states such as the Vatican, it can be true of bigger states. But the other thing more fundamentally about walls is that a home needs walls. I'm speaking here from the comfort of my office, which has walls, in the comfort of my home, which has walls. And the walls are to keep the elements out, the weather, and critters out, and indeed, yes, if necessary, those who want to harm my family out. Of course, the door is a bridge to my neighbours. I'm meant to welcome them in, and I want to go out and meet them. But it's also the door has locks on it, quite rightly, because I need to be able to choose which of my neighbours are trustworthy and which are going to violate my family. So as regards subsidiarity, what is subsidiarity and solidarity but walls? So subsidiarity is protecting the freedom and political power of the ordinary family from encroachments of big government. So you have to have laws in place and certain practices in place that protect the family from the encroachments of unwanted attention by burgeoning big government. So there's absolutely nothing wrong with walls. In fact, they are absolutely essential. In fact, the sort of walls we don't want are the sort of walls that the walls of silence that surround corruption, that allow global corporations and international financial institutions and big governments to work together for their own interests and not actually being open as regards the way they conduct business. We've all seen numerous examples of corruption on that level. That's the sort of walls we want bringing down. We need to have transparency, right? not walls of silence and walls of conspiracy and walls of secrecy. So yes, some walls are bad, but not normally the ones that people are talking about when they're talking about walls being bad. Some walls are good. Okay. I would say one thing is that yes, you and I as individuals are not able to bring down the global monolith, the global corporations, the international financial system, the federal government, the United Nations, not by ourselves. And one thing certainly keeps me sane is not having any anxiety about things beyond my control. So if I don't have control over something, if I'm not able to do anything about something, I am not going to get too upset about the fact that I can't do anything about it, because it's not my fault, right? We should worry about things that are within our power, that we are able to do something about, and that's going to be the second half of the talk. That we have an absolute responsibility to do what we should, because we can make a positive change. Where we cannot make a positive change, where we can do nothing at all because of our effective impotence, we should not worry about that. So worry about the things you can change, not about the things you can't. Okay, but the other thing about it is, that there's a saying, which I'm sure you've heard, that give the devil enough rope and he'll hang himself. In other words, that evil is not sustainable, it's self-destructive, which is why we get sayings like pride precedes a fall, right? That a decadent system, either financially, politically, morally, socially, is unsustainable. It carries within itself the seeds of its own destruction. So if you give the devil enough rope, he'll hang himself. The problem is, of course, that he'll hang you first. So if the devil gets enough power, he will take down innocent victims with him, which of course he's doing already. So that's the situation we're in. But the point is, big is unsustainable. Ultimately, globalization is unsustainable. We're beginning to see that now. Putting all of our eggs in other people's baskets is not a very wise thing, whether it be a major breakdown in supply chain issues, which could be caused by all sorts of things, wars, pandemics, cost of fuel, all sorts of things, then we actually would find ourselves in big trouble. Indeed, ultimately in danger of starving to death. So putting all our eggs in one basket is, the ancient wisdom, don't put all your eggs in one basket. Well, basically globalism is saying, well, we don't have to do, we offload most of our industry to the Pacific Rim, and that will just concentrate on things that we're good at, such as technology and services, but that so-called comparative advantage. Because that was naive, because if someone in the Pacific Rim can actually take phone calls cheaper than someone over here, then that's going to be all the service industries, the headquarters of the global corporation. Everyone's going to move out the Pacific Rim because it's cheaper. Of course, this is part of globalization. They don't want nations because they want a playing field with no obstacles on it, and national sovereignty is an obstacle. They want to be able to move capital and labor around where as freely as they like, and not with pesky, irritating governments in the way. Also, the system we're living under, I don't have time to talk about this too much, is driven by debt. It's debt driven, and ultimately a system that's relying on huge compound interest bearing debts is also in the long term unsustainable. And on a moral level, Mahatma Gandhi famously said, the world has enough for everyone's need, but not everyone's greed. Again, once we have a philosophy which is about self-interest, self-empowerment, selfishness, pride, then we will never be satisfied. That great prophet Mick Jagger said, I'm joking, by the way, that great prophet Mick Jagger said, I can't get no satisfaction, which is not merely negative, it's double negative, if you know your grammar. I can't get no satisfaction. But basically, those who always want more because they're greedy are never going to be satisfied. Get rich, be happy is a false mantra for a false god. You need to remember, by the way, as regards satisfaction, from the Latin comes the word satis, which means enough, right? You're not going to be satisfied until you feel you have enough. And we live in a culture of hedonism where everybody wants more. more and onwards. Someone called that the moronic way of seeing things. The great and necessary virtues such as prudence and temperance are not practiced. The great Catholic convert poet Roy Campbell likened human society to a car. He said society is like a car, that the wisdom is the steering wheel, tradition is the brakes, and the accelerator is progress or innovation. And he said we live in a culture that's thrown away the steering wheel, refuses to use the brakes, and got its foot hard down in the accelerator. I think we know where that's heading. So the point is, we don't really have to worry about bringing down the globalist decadent culture, because it's going to bring itself down. What we have to do is to have something in place that's sustainable to replace it. That's what we need to be working towards now. So a few little aphorisms before I move on to the second part of the talk. Asking the question again: what's wrong with the world? That the great conservative philosopher Edmund Burke said that liberty itself must be limited in order to be possessed. There's a paradox there. Liberty itself must be limited in order to be possessed. That we want freedom, then we have to actually accept and embrace responsibility, right? Self-sacrifice, or what Alexander Solzhenitsyn calls self-limitation. Against that what you might call solidarity, right? Liberty itself must be limited in order to be possessed. We have to show solidarity through self-sacrifice for that common good. That's solidarity. But then the other principle, which actually ultimately dovetails with it, although it appears to contradict it, is a so-called liberal maxim by the Catholic historian Lord Acton, who said that power tends to corrupt, and absolute power tends to corrupt absolutely. Saying something similar, J.R.R. Tolkien, that great prophet over there, said the problem with politics is those that want power are ipso facto, by that very fact, the sort of people who don't want to have it. Right? People that actually want power are the power hungry, the egocentric, are the people who don't really want ruling us. That's the trouble. So power tends to corrupt, and absolute power tends to corrupt absolutely. That's the argument of subsidiarity. So these two pillars of the Catholic Church's social teaching are based in some sense on those two maxims. Liberty itself must be limited in order to be possessed. Solidarity. Power tends to corrupt, and absolute power tends to corrupt absolutely. Subsidiarity. Right? Don't give too much power to those who are power hungry, and indeed protect yourself from those people. Subsidiarity. And the one of my favorites is the quote from Oscar Wilde: "Anarchy is freedom's own Judas." Okay, so that those who that preach freedom without responsibility are going to lead to anarchy, and anarchy is freedom's own Judas. Because what is anarchy? Ultimately, you go back to Plato's Republic, and you get all that in there. That basically anarchy is where no law is able to is being practiced. We live in a state of utter lawlessness. What happens in a state of utter lawlessness is that gangs take over. That's what anarchy is basically, is gangs ruling the streets, no democratic mandate, but they're the ones with the power. It's all about brute power. The rest of us are living in fear. In that situation, when you have the rule of gangs, what we really have, what we want then, because we have no choice, is for the biggest gang to actually impose its will upon all the other gangs. We have a totalitarian tyranny, but at least we have order. And then you start working for freedom within the totalitarian system to bring back the freedom that was lost because of anarchy. So all of this, these aphorisms from political philosophy and literature are very, I think, helpful. Another one from Oscar Wilde, which I think is a good one to keep in mind. But for those who believe that a free market exists, because it doesn't. The market has always been manipulated by those who have power in the market, so that the free market doesn't exist any more than the perfect human beings exist. Jean-Jacques Rousseau, his idea of the noble savage, he believed we were all basically innocent, and we would behave well if we weren't corrupted by civilization, because he didn't believe in original sin. Well, we know better than that, and in other words, that we have to can protect ourselves from the selfishness of others and indeed the selfishness of ourselves. So, but what Oscar Wilde said, and it's a lesson perhaps against free market libertarians, is that a cynic is one of those the price of everything and the value of nothing. If you think that freedom is basically predicated upon the price of goods on a market which is not free, even if you think it is because it's being manipulated by those who have power over it, then you are ultimately being cynical about human nature and about the economy. And a final one to finish with is one of my favorites from Chesterton, G.K. Chesterton. He said over almost 100 years ago, he said, the coming peril is not Bolshevism, the coming peril is not communism, the coming peril is standardization by a low standard. So in other words, a dumbing down of everything to a level of banal mediocrity, the absence of excellence. So these are all the problems. What's wrong with the world? Well, I've just given you a whole list of things that are wrong with the world in the first half of the talk. We're now going to switch, however. I don't know how many of you have read The Lord of the Rings. Obviously, I've got Tolkien over that shoulder, Chesterton over that shoulder. I'm keen on both these great writers. But despairing and doing nothing in the face of great and mighty evil is what I call the Denethor option. So we've heard of the Benedict option and other sort of options, but the Denethor option. So in The Lord of the Rings, there's the steward of Gondor is Denethor, and he spends too much time looking in the Palantir stone. Palantir in Elvish means far-seeing, or far-seer. The German word for television is Fernsehen, which means far-seeing. The English word for television means far-seeing. Tele, Greek for far, video, Latin to see. So he's looking in the Palantir and spend too much time looking in the television. In other words, the Palantir stone, what is it? You see what the dominant will wants you to see. So Denethor keeps looking in this, looking at his screen, right, at his beginning to believe that the evil cannot be defeated. It's too powerful. There's no point fighting it. The only thing that left is despair. And Denethor commits suicide. Well, that absolutely guarantees defeat, your own personal defeat. And of course, you're helping the enemy in the process. So the Denethor option is not an option for us. We have to fight, irrespective of how powerful the enemy is. I'm going to talk about how we can fight now. So I want to begin the second half of the talk with a story, short story. So there was an American. May as well be an American, right? Why not? There's an American, and he's on holiday in Ireland, in the west of Ireland, so the sort of rural, rustic part of Ireland, and he's trying to get the Limerick. But he's lost his way. You know, it's the days before GPSs, right? And he's lost his way. He drives past, and he sees this Irishman sitting on a fence, sucking on a straw, and he waves to him. Drives past. The Irishman waves back. Drives past. About an hour later, he's still lost. He drives past the same Irishman. Right? He's clearly going in circles. So in deep frustration, he pulls over and he goes over to the Irishman and he says, "Excuse me," he said, "I'm afraid I'm hopelessly lost, and I wonder if you could tell me the way to how I get to Limerick." So the Irishman looks at him for a while and sucks on his straw, and with a mischievous glint in his eye, says, "If I were you," he said, "I wouldn't start from here." Not very helpful advice, but very helpful way of starting the second half of the talk, because that's what it might be where we might be tempted to say, right, if we would not start from here. The world's in a mess. It's not a good place. We're in a mess as a society, as a culture, politically, economically, globally, locally. We wouldn't start from here. But of course, we have nowhere else to start from, because this is where we are. So now the second half of the story, we're going to ask the same question, but give a different answer. So the question I began the whole talk with was, what's wrong with the world? And I just gave a whole list of things that are wrong with the world, right? There's plenty of things wrong with the world. About 100 years ago, over 100 years ago, there was a newspaper that sent out a survey to famous people, to celebrities, as we would now call them, asking them that question and wanted answers. What's wrong with the world? And most people did what I've just done and gave a whole list of things that were wrong with the world. But then G.K. Chesterton was asked the question, what's wrong with the world? And G.K. Chesterton said, I am. I'm going to let you think about that. Because ultimately, if we want the world to be a better place, it starts with ourselves. Every good action we take is making the world a better place. Every bad action we take is making the world a worse place. So what we have to do is to practice what we preach. And in the Solidarity Party, you believe in localism, in strong local government, strong local communities, strong local businesses, as opposed to these global corporations that are carving up the world for themselves. So, second half of the talk, and this brings us to the title, Freedom is in Our Pocket, begins and ends with us. It actually would end with a better world, but it's all about us. So, the bottom line is that we get to vote in elections once every however many years, depending upon the country you're living in and the sort of election you'd be talking about. We get to vote in elections occasionally. We should vote in elections, absolutely. Obviously, you believe that. You're members of the American Solidarity Party, right? So we should vote in elections. We should stand in the elections. We should be part of the electoral process. I was going to call it the democratic process. It's not very democratic these days, but it's the electoral process. Of course, but your vote, when you cast it, has an element of power and influence. It's certainly worth casting. But every single day of our lives, we cast many votes, because every dollar in our pockets, in our wallets, in our bank accounts, are votes. And if we spend those votes badly, we are making the world a worse place. If we spend those votes well, we're making the world a better place. So we have to inform ourselves and then inform others of how we go about voting on a daily basis with the money in our pockets. That's why freedom is in our pockets. I'm going to talk a few ways of looking at this. I want to begin by a story which means a lot to me personally. Well, you might have gathered that here I am with a pint of craft brewed IPA by a South Carolina brewery. So I want to talk about small beer, first of all. There's a chapter in my book, Small is Still Beautiful, about small beer. And it illustrates what I'm trying to say here. So the brewing industry in the United Kingdom back in the early 1970s, so what's that now, 50 plus years ago, was basically being carved up between four major breweries. They were forcing out of business the small breweries. They were buying up the pubs. So these four big breweries also owned most of the pubs in the country. So they not only produced basically bad and mediocre beer to a captive audience because they had no real consumer choice, but they also owned the retail outlets for their products, the pubs. They were called tied houses. They're pubs that were tied to a particular brewery and sold their goods. So that, not surprisingly, in this situation, the quality of the ale, the quality of the beer was pretty poor. So four Englishmen on a holiday in Ireland. We're back to Ireland again, but not with Americans now, with Englishmen. And they're at a pub in Dublin. This is a true story. And weeping into their Guinness about how the state of the brewing industry in the UK and how it is very difficult to get a decent pint of ale. So these four men decided to form an organisation called the Campaign for Real Ale, known as CAMRA, of which I was a member for many years. I lived in the UK. And those four men, with this organisation, within a few years had 30,000 members. including, of course, one the practice each members that were trying to brew their own ale and sell it. And it's not very easy to do that because the pubs were owned by the big brewers. So one of the members of the Campaign for Real Ale was a member of Parliament. And in the UK system, and this is one good thing about the UK system, is that a member, I think it might only be once a year, I'm not sure the exact rules, but a private member, so an ordinary member of Parliament, not the government, not only be tied to the government, just an ordinary member of Parliament, can introduce a private member's bill. That's what it's called. And this particular member of Parliament introduced a private member's bill saying that every pub in the country, irrespective of who owned it, needed to give access to small brewers by having one pump in the pub for a guest ale, an ale other than that produced by the big brewer. And of course, this gave access to the market to these small, excellent ales that are much better in terms of taste, quality than the mass-produced ones. And this was the beginning of a micro brew craft brewing explosion in the UK. Dozens of new breweries being founded, etc. Then a couple of these, two of these small brewers became beer consultants, which means that they stopped brewing beer, but started instead showing other people how to brew beer. And one of those companies came to New England. I'm not saying this all due to those four Englishmen, that what we see now in the US, but I think it had a significant part to play. Came to New England and started showing people how to set up small breweries, how to brew good craft ale in sufficient quantities to be commercially viable, etc. And then we now have over here, you can't be in this country at the moment, any town with more than 20,000 people, I think, has a brewery. So this is a revolution that's happened since, 1974 was when those four men met in the pub in Dublin. So this is an example of what we can do. And of course, the American Solidarity Party is another practical example of that, people getting together to try to make changes. So that is one way of doing it. I want to talk about appropriate technology. And again, this is localism. This is something which that doesn't necessarily apply here, but this is something that E.F. Schumacher championed, what he called intermediate technology, which is now called sustainable technology or appropriate technology. I'll give you one example, because one that I think strikes me as being appropriate. And then, then we'll get back to what we can do personally. I think that's important. So he said that the way that global corporations and international financial institutions do business is that they will get together, the IMF will get together with a couple of global corporations and with the Indian government, so big government, big business, big finance, to build big tech, a nuclear power station. The consequence of that is that for a 200-mile radius around the nuclear power station, which is going to be built, in one particular place, men folk will leave villages, leave their wives, leave their children, break up families, break up communities, to go and live in hideous shanty towns around the construction site to build this huge nuclear power station, which let's say cost $1 billion, right, for the sake of it. Now, what Schumacher says is, for that same $1 billion, you could put an electrical generator in 1 million villages. And then the men folk wouldn't have to leave. You'd have sustainable local economies, family-oriented, small businesses, sustainable, local. But of course, that's not going to happen because the International Monetary Fund and the global corporations and big government don't care about small communities. So again, this is the struggle that we're facing, right? Now, I'm going to give, for the remainder of the talk, another sort of 10 or 15 minutes or so. I'd like to just give just a few examples. I'm not being holier than thou, honestly, but I can't really see a better way of showing how we can change the world for the better with the dollars in our pocket, voting with our dollars, than by showing how my wife and I are trying to do that. So first of all, for about 8 months of the year, we have local farmers markets here. and we buy most of our produce from the local farmers market. Apart from, I'm pointing that way out there, we've got a vegetable garden. So certainly the salad that Susanna made tonight was almost exclusively from our own garden. But we're not self-sufficient by any means. So we go to the farmers market and we buy our produce in the farmers market. We go to a local family-owned butchers, husband and wife, with about 2 employees for our meat. So we're not buying into large corporations. We are buying into our local community and our local economy and our local culture. We obviously know Butcher and his wife. They've become friends. My wife knows them better because she does most of the shopping. We know the people from whom we buy produce, the small local producers, small local farmers in the farmers market. They've become friends. We have relationships with them. We used to, many years ago now, shop at Whole Foods. And there was a good reason for this once. Whole Foods endeavored to practice subsidiarity. So they would, our local Whole Foods, I think this was generally true of Whole Foods, they would have sections of their store for local produce. In other words, they would interface, even though they're a national chain, interface with local producers, and local producers could get their products into the big supermarket, help their sales. Very, very good. Our own local Whole Foods even allowed a farmer's market in the car park, the parking lot of the store. So this was the good old days of Whole Foods. But then, of course, Whole Foods was bought out by Amazon, and certainly various totalitarian changes made about. Well, I'm not going to itemize them, but we have not shopped in Whole Foods since. Publix, on the other hand, for those of you who live in the Southeast, Publix is a cooperative, an ESOP, an employee stock ownership plan company. In other words, that the company is owned by its employees, who are in fact not employees because they are not employed by it, they own it. So this idea of ESOPs, employee stock ownership plan companies, is also a way of showing both subsidiarity and solidarity, particularly in companies that need to be larger, economies of scale. There are options to just having the standard capitalist model even then. So we're happy to shop in Publix for things we can't get in the farmers market or the local butcher shop. So these are the way you can change the world for a better place, by voting with your dollars in the right places. But you can also make the world a better place by the dollars you don't spend, as well as the dollars you do spend. So another thing I would suggest is to become techno-minimalists. You know, many of us spend more time with our gadgets than we do with our God. Gadgets have become gadgets. We spend all of our time with them. We're addicted to them. If you don't believe you're addicted to your gadgets, try to give them up for Lent. Obviously you have to do work, but I mean for just leisure purposes, and you might see how difficult it is. So we need to be techno-minimalists. So that means, because where do you buy your high-tech stuff from? From the global corporations, right? Because they're the people that produce it. So insofar as you are buying the latest gadget as soon as it comes out, and upgrading as soon as there's upgrades available, and you have the latest state-of-the-art, avant-garde tech, then you are buying into the global corporate system. So again, techno-minimalism is making the world a better place for the dollars you don't spend. I mean, I'm on a computer now. I work at a computer all day. I'm a writer. I'm an editor. But I don't have the latest versions of things. We don't upgrade all the time. I try not to be anywhere near my phone most of the time. So again, that's something else. Now, as regards maintenance, I suppose better men than I would do their own landscaping. I did for a while, but I found that it was taking a lot of time and not particularly good at some. I mean, I can do brawn with no brain, right? Just strength with no brain I can do. But if anything takes any sort of skill, I'm challenged when it comes to outside stuff. So we pay a local landscaper. We don't pay a big landscaping company. Don't pay all the ones that we see advertising big. We pay at the moment. Well, all the time. We've been living here for 18 and a half years now. We moved in here at the end of 2006, and we've only ever had landscapers that were just one person owning it, who might have at most 3 or 4 people working for him. The present person at the moment has no one working for him, just doing it by himself. He's hoping to get one person to help. So again, we're providing employment for a local young man to do the work that he's doing. And he's doing what we need doing. That's a win-win situation. We're not buying into, again, big business or larger business. Same thing when our deck painted, we don't go to the big companies of advertising. We ask around for people who've had painting jobs done for recommendations, and we do it that way. Same thing about window cleaner. We've used the same window cleaner now for 20 years. He's watching me get old. I'm watching him get old. He's still healthy enough to get up the ladder, which is all that matters. He does a good job. He's a Jehovah's Witness. He comes to our house and sees the icons all over the place and turns a blind eye. We've become good friends. We just don't talk about that sort of stuff. Again, we're supporting the local economy, supporting the local community, supporting the local people for the dollars in our pockets. If we want to go out for some recreational stuff, we go to local theatres to produce local productions. Where we are here, there are some good Christian theatres. There's several good theatres we go where they've done things such as dramatizations of the Chronicles of Narnia extremely well. The Logos Theatre is one of them around here. We even go to Bob Jones University, if that's not too shocking for you, the Protestant fundamentalist university, which is local to us here, because they do great Shakespeare plays, great musicals, great opera. I think it's not as good as it used to be because of change of president, but we've seen some great productions there. If we want to go out to eat, we don't eat in chains. We eat in locally owned restaurants, or maybe small chains, 5 or 6 restaurants locally, but not the big chains. We homeschool our children, so we're certainly not buying into the public school system, that's for sure. We also support the new generation of classical schools, classical liberal arts schools being set up around the country. We founded last summer the hybrid Sacred Heart Hybrid Academy, which is for homeschoolers that now go to school in a proper a school setting on Tuesdays and Thursdays, and they're given enough work there to homework to get through the rest of the week. So that before that, with a Highland Latin School, which is a chain of small schools. But I think it's franchised rather than owned, but it's Memoria Press people who are very good. I'm on the board of several small Catholic and Protestant, or merely Christian, liberal arts colleges. Again, the education system, don't buy into the state-run education system, buy out of it. So we can't defeat the devil ultimately in the sense of macroscopically, globally, right? But we can defeat the devil with the help of God, by God's grace. If we get to heaven, we have defeated the devil once and for all. There's no way the ultimate triumph, which is why the church in heaven is called the church triumphant, right? Beyond the power of the devil. This, however, is not the church triumphant, it's the church militant. We are Midas Christi, soldiers of Christ, and in enemy territory. That's why church militant means the church at war. So we are meant to be warriors, culture warriors, spiritual warriors. The most important thing is that we have to keep our eye on the finishing line. And if we keep our eye on heaven, we will make the world a better place. If we lose sight of heaven and start worrying too much about the world, we will make the world a worse place, because we will be becoming worldly. So this is, again, a important thing to remember, that really everything ultimately is predicated upon the 2 great commandments: love the Lord thy God and to love our neighbor. In that order, by the way. If anybody wants you to tell you to love your neighbor in defiance of the love or law of God, then you don't get things the wrong way around, right? But beyond that, as I've just said, that the culture of death will defeat itself. It's self-destructive. The living dead, like the poor, are always with us, because pride is always with us from our first parents onwards. We have to love our neighbors, and that does actually include loving our enemies. So another thing we have to be very, very wary of is anger. I think if we become anger, almost all of us very quickly lose charity. If we lose charity, we lose clarity in the way we're thinking and the way we're acting. And we're not we're not moving in the right direction for heaven. So we're losing, and our neighbors are losing. So if we find ourselves getting angry, we need to go somewhere else to calm ourselves down. You know, I sometimes think that the one place we should not follow in the footsteps of Jesus Christ is in turning over the money tables in the temple. I'm pleased he did it, by the way. Very pleased he did it. But if we follow Christ in his anger, we lose charity. The righteous anger is for the righteous, and let he who is righteous cast the first stone. All right, just to finish up here. So we can't make heaven on earth. So one of the big mistakes of the progressives is they believe that we're progressing through the power of science and technology and human liberation and the rest of it towards a golden age in the future where everyone will live happy ever after, free from religion and superstition, and technology will be our savior. Well, that's nonsense. We don't believe in utopia, which by the way means nowhere. We are not utopians, we are realists in this sense. So we can't make heaven on earth, but we can get to heaven by making our own corner of the earth closer to heaven. I say that again. We can't make heaven on earth, but we can get to heaven by making our own corner of the earth closer to heaven. If we want freedom, we need only reach into our pockets. We have nothing to lose but our chains and our loose change. Thank you. I'm ready. Yeah, I think that there's not a dichotomy. I think there's a dovetailing here. I'll address the fact that farmers markets are more expensive in just a moment, but I agree completely that we need to buy out of the whole consumerist mentality, which means we don't need to be owning 50 different pairs of shoes and 50 ties. I must confess, I've probably got about 30, but most of them have been given to me over the years. I suppose I could give some of them away if I knew people that needed ties. But so I agree completely that we should learn to buy out of the consumer system by not being consumers, but being just as Gandhi said, the world's got enough for everyone's need, not for everyone's greed. So if we concentrate on our needs and not on wants, then we'll all be, first of all, happier, but also we'll be healthier, and our local communities will be healthier, and the world will be healthier. So I agree completely. I don't think I need to say any more of that if I'm just agreeing with someone. Now, as regards farmers markets being more expensive, yeah. Now, I have no problem with that, but I want to just posit a question that, yeah, if it's literally true that you can't afford to buy produce from anywhere except a big supermarket chain, I would suggest maybe you should at least shop around which of the supermarket chains, do a bit of research, which supermarket chains are least poisonous, as in certain agendas which are damaging, and go to the one that's least poisonous. But I would also suggest that, you look at where we can also not be spending money. Are we buying new gadgets more often than we need? It may well be we can't afford to spend money supporting local farmers because we spend too much money supporting Microsoft. So, again, we need to be looking at priorities and saying, well, it's more important actually that I spend money on food. This is one thing we should be thinking about. This is important, that everybody should be expecting to spend a larger proportion of their family budgets on good, healthy, necessary things like food, and less on unnecessary things. So we shouldn't be thinking, well, I can't spend more than 10% of my family budget on food. Yes, you can. Just means look at the other 90% and see what you can cut out, so you can more money to spend on food. It's not only going to be healthier food for you, it's going to be healthier for your local community, and will support local farmers. So yeah, that would be my answer. I don't think it's an either or. I think it's a both and. Yeah, one thing I would say is that I have very little time for extracurricular recreational reading. So nearly all of my reading is done work related. I always have one book I'm reading recreationally in the evenings, and it's normally a work of literature because that's what I prefer. And I don't spend much time surfing the web. So no, I don't know this writer. I'm pleased that it sounds like a she, that she's doing great work. And thanks be to God for people like that. But I don't say I know it all. I'm 64. I'm getting old, and I've been looking at these ideas and trying to live them for 40 years or more. And I don't really need to read other people just that are buttressing what I already believe. But I'm pleased that they're out there, so the people that don't believe it are seeing the arguments. Yeah, well, again, you have to make those prudential judgments. That, I mean, the one beautiful thing about human persons is that we're all unique. One beautiful thing about human families is that we're all unique, and so the needs of the individual families will be different from one to the other. So I can't make particular specific judgments for you. All I would say is that we need to prioritize. We have to have a hierarchy of health, a healthy hierarchy, if you like. And as I said, we need to be willing to spend more money on food, and therefore needing to spend less money on other things. Most other things are not anywhere near as important. Obviously, paying the bill, you've got a mortgage, you've got to pay the mortgage. I understand all that, right? So I'm just saying we need to try to think outside the box, uh, and try to reprioritize. Say that, well, I want to spend as much of my money. I want to use my dollars to vote for a better world. And how can I do that? And it really begins ultimately by choosing to buy local instead of global. And we have to work out how we can do that within the limitations of our own situations, our own budgets. I mean, I understand that fully. Well, yes. So they reached out to me. They'd obviously read some of my things. They reached out to me and asked would I be willing to send some stuff to them which would be suitable for their journal, and I was delighted to do so. That's the same relationship I have with the American Solidarity Party. I'm not a member. An avid supporter and fellow traveller, so I was happy to help. But no, I'm not involved, and I don't know. First of all, I didn't even know they existed until they reached out to me a couple of months ago. So I'm delighted that they're there, and I hope that people are listening to them because heaven knows they're needed. Yes, so basically, that markets are not merely disembodied, mechanical, mechanistic, mathematical equations. Markets are human beings and human persons making choices. Therefore, it's not going to be an absolute clean empirical science. It's a human activity. The market is a human activity. And we should not even think about the market being any different from a market in medieval times we go to, all right? So those people that go to the market with more power than others, through economies of scale, for instance, they have the power to advertise, they have the power to exclude other people from the market, they have the power to influence government to favour policies that help them. We can see how big business is in bed with big government. They basically fix the game to ensure that they have unfair advantages. That's the real world. Now, you might say, wouldn't it be wonderful if that didn't happen? Yes, it would. In the same way, it'd be wonderful if we didn't sin, right? If we weren't selfish and we all behaved in a virtuous way all the time towards each other, we authentically laid down our lives for our brothers and sisters, would we live in a much better world? You bet. It'd be close to perfect, in fact. But it ain't going to happen because we're human beings. So what's true of our relationship with each other in society is true with our relationship with each other in the market. And it's just naive to believe anything else. Yeah, that's a great question, but we have to get our priorities right. First of all, we have to understand that the victory's already been won, that the church triumphant is victorious, that Christ is the king of the cosmos, is the king of heaven, and that all we are called to do is to be good and faithful servants, which means being good and faithful soldiers, warriors, culture warriors, economic warriors, political warriors, in this life. Our tour of active duty, of active service in the church militant is the proverbially 70 years and 10, 70 years. Some of us live longer, some of us don't live that long. So at all times, we should be loving the Lord our God and loving our neighbor and keeping our eye on the finishing line. Four last things: the memento mori, death, judgment, heaven, and hell. And if we are authentically trying to become saints, trying to become more and more Christ-like in our lives, we will change everybody around us for the better. That is the best way to make a better society, is to become holy. And ultimately, sanity and sanctity are exactly the same thing. They're synonymous.